When the going gets tough, the tough get going. This sentiment doesn't seem to be holding true for India. India's largest telecom service provider, Bharti Airtel, saw a drop in net profit last week. And Raghuram Rajan believes that we've moved from a license Raj to a resource Raj. Let's get to the root of these issues. And for this, I have with me in the studio Sukumar Ranganathan. Thanks, Sukumar, for being with us on this show today. So let's start with Airtel. We saw last week that there was a drop in net profits, and a lot of it was attributed to operational expenditure. Can you elucidate a bit more about what this operational expenditure is all about?
See, I think there are a couple of layers to this whole Airtel story. The first one is the fact that competing in India has become tougher. The incidental costs of doing business in India are higher because there is more competition. When there is more competition, it's tougher to get people. Costs have gone up. Telecom tower costs, running costs, diesel costs with which you keep your telecom towers up. There are a million different ways in which costs have gone up because we are in the middle of a general inflationary cycle, and even services companies, telecom services companies do get affected by that. But I think the larger issue here, the one factor that's really responsible for the decline in net profit is Africa. Because if you look at what happened in the quarter ended 30th June, Africa made a huge loss, right? Much higher. India made a profit. India and South Asia, Sri Lanka is included in that. India made a profit, marginally lower than the profit that it made in the corresponding quarter last year, but still a very healthy profit. So it was Africa that pulled the number down. But to me, the interesting number is really the cash flow. If you look at the free cash flow, it's improved significantly this quarter when you compare it to the corresponding quarter, which to me is an indication that much of the capital expenditure that needed to go into Africa has gone into Africa, but it's not begun to pay off, right? So, because what happens, you put down some investment in the ground, it needs to reflect in your revenue. That's not started happening. I think the question is, when will it start happening? Because once that kicks in, things will be all right. But I think it's going to take 2-3 more quarters for that to kick in. In the middle of that, you have a company which will continue to face competition, which will continue to operate in an inflationary regime, which will probably also face some backlash in terms of regulations, because there's this whole talk of refarming, taking away spectrum, making them pay back for it, pay more for it and all that. So it's not going to be easy. And so the next 2-3 quarters will be a little worrying for Bharti. But I think by and large, I think you really need to look at what's going to happen a year down the line or a year and a half down the line. And to my mind, I still think Africa was a good bet for the company, right? And I think it will help them. India, thanks to the fluidity in the regulatory regime, it's anyone's guess, how that will go. But Africa, I think, will eventually prove to be a good bet.
Now let's talk of this adverse tax and regulatory regime that we keep talking about. Now, to what extent can you blame this for the decline in mobile profitability in India?
I think to some extent, yes, because everyone has written a lot and spoken a lot about service tax and what impact it will have. And that's true, but it will affect them to a certain extent. But I think there are much broader issues, right? And the broader issues are the issues that I spoke to you about. As far as regulations are concerned, I think it's got more of a future impact in terms of the risk associated with it, in terms of what you may have to pay going forward in the future. And it also affects your ability to raise debt at a really good interest rate, because there is a certain heightened risk involved with it. But anyway, I think most of these companies have raised much of the debt that they wanted to. Bharti, for instance, is carrying around 12 billion of debt on its books, largely on account of the Zain acquisition and the payment for the 3G spectrum in India. So I think that part of it is done. So the tax regime that you spoke of, its impact is marginal. The regulatory regime's impact will be significant, but it's in the future. I think what you're really seeing is a company in transition. And that's the pain that this company is facing now.
It would survive?
Oh, I think so. I think because look at it this way, it's the largest telco in India. It's got a significant presence in Africa, which everyone, I think across sectors, people believe it to be the next big market, right? It's where the next billion customers are going to come from for a variety of businesses. So I think it's in the long term, I still think this company will survive and do well. Not just survive, but thrive.
Okay, optimistic note. Let's go to Raghuram Rajan. He's newly being appointed Chief Economic Advisor. Firstly, a very blatant question. What do you think about his appointment? Do you feel he's fit for the role and is going
Oh,
to
I think
major?
so. I think it's a brilliant move. He's very good. To get someone who's served in a similar role in the IMF to actually come down and do this here is great. There's also talk that this is a sort of a precursor to him being appointed Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, which I think would be equally brilliant because he is a very intelligent person. He's also, from what one can make out by speaking to various people in IMF and other places, an able administrator, which means he knows how to navigate the system. And anyone who's taking a position either in the Reserve Bank or in the Government of India needs to know how to navigate the system. So I think he'll do very well.
Now, recently in many speeches, he's constantly, focused on the fact that reforms, he's very disappointed with the reforms in India. And he said something very interesting that, given the reform situation, we have moved from, license Raj to resource Raj. What do you have to say about that?
No, I think that's perfectly true. You look at any company which has really made a lot of money and which has emerged as a significant presence in the national stage in the last 15 years, and most of these companies are companies which have some kind of resource play. It's either spectrum or ore or fuel of some sort, or it's some sort of resource play. And when you have that sort of resource play, there is, unless you have a complete clarity of policy, there's going to be a huge opportunity for crony capitalism, right? And it's why some companies stay away from this entire resources business. They don't want to get into it. For instance, Mahindra & Mahindra, and this is a well-chronicled fact, Anand Mahindra has repeatedly said he doesn't want to get into anything that has some sort of resources play because he knows the kind of fallout that can have. Forget the fallout. I think to really get into that business, you need to be well connected with the government. You need to know how to play the system. So I think it was a very, very prescient observation.
Also, we often keep focusing a lot on policy making, and given the fact that perhaps it's categorically can be said that this would be a very good move for macroeconomic policy making, but finally implementation is all onto the coalition parties and coalition politics. So given the current situation, how effective and significant do you think macroeconomic policy making by Raghuram Rajan is going to make a significant change?
So I think he's got a very supportive finance minister, right, who I think shares the same kind of philosophy. And much of what needs to be done is also at a symbolic level, right? You need to send out the right kind of signals to investors in India, to investors abroad, telling them that India will do the right things. Implementation, anybody's guess, right? But it'll happen, right? I think it's this whole issue related to tax, for instance, or with retrospective taxation, which the current finance minister is trying to sort of disentangle the whole mess that was created. I don't think there was any political exigency to do that. So the implementation issue in that is very straightforward. Disentangling that is very, very straightforward. I think it's only when you come to larger issues, the government's own fiscal policy, right? The government's approach to labor reforms, that you may face, that you will definitely face some kind of pushback. But I think he will give the right kind of advice. I think the finance minister is going to be pragmatic enough to do the kind of things that need to be done at this point in time. You obviously can't go out and do all the things that free marketers want you to do, because that would be political suicide, especially in the run-up to the elections, right? Elections are due in 2014. Some people think they might happen in 2013. So no one wants to commit political harakiri.